1947. A dark cave in Qumran. A shattered clay jar reveals a secret that modern religion wasn't ready for. A king who never died, a priest who has no father. Ancient scrolls found in the mud call this man Elohim, God himself. Why was the story of Melchizedek buried for 2,000 years? And what if I told you he is the reason your faith exists today? You're watching the Forbidden Bible, where the hidden war of angels and demons, the ancient prophecies sealed for the last days, and the forbidden mysteries of Scripture are revealed with cinematic clarity. If you're new here, subscribe and tap the bell icon, because what you're about to discover may change the way you understand heaven, the unseen realm, and your place within it. The Bible is obsessed with bloodlines, but right in the middle of Genesis, the pattern breaks. A man steps onto the stage with no birth certificate, no parents, and no tomb. He is Melchizedek. To the Essenes of the Dead Sea, he was a cosmic judge. To you, he is the missing piece of the puzzle you've been looking for your whole life. 4,000 years ago, Genesis 14 describes the First World War. 4 powerful kings from the east, led by Chedorlaomer, crush everything in Canaan and kidnap Abraham's nephew, Lot. Abram takes 318 household servants on a suicide mission. Under the cover of darkness, he strikes. It is a massacre. He humbles the giants and rescues the captives. He is now the undisputed hero of the region. As Abram returns through the King's Valley, he is met by 2 rulers. First, the king of Sodom, smelling of greed. But then Melchizedek appears. He carries no sword, only bread and wine. Notice the stark contrast. The king of Sodom offers Abraham wealth, but wants the souls of the people. Melchizedek offers nothing but a blessing and a simple meal, yet Abraham gives him everything. Abraham knew that wealth from a corrupt king is a trap, but a blessing from the priest of God is an eternal inheritance. Abram, the man who humiliated 4 empires' bows and gives this stranger 10% of everything. Then Melchizedek evaporates. For the next 1,000 years, the Bible goes dead silent. Why would God introduce the most powerful authority on earth, only to hide him for 10 centuries? After that brief exchange, Melchizedek walks back into the shadows. The dust of the valley settles, and the Bible just moves on. It is haunting. While Genesis usually obsesses over the end of stories recording every burial and every bone for Melchizedek, there is only silence. No obituary, no successor. It is as if God hit the mute button on the most fascinating character in the book. 1 century passes, then 5, then 1,000 years. During this time, a new system is built, the law. Moses establishes a priesthood based on rigid DNA. If you were not a son of Aaron, you could not touch the altar, period. The memory of a king priest who ruled by righteousness instead of bloodline was scrubbed from the record, replaced by the endless smoke of animal sacrifices. For 10 centuries, Melchizedek was the Bible's greatest cold case. God was letting the world feel the weight of a system where priests grew old and died, where no king could ever truly heal the soul. Then, around 1000 BC, the silence shatters. In Jerusalem, the city once called Salem, King David sits on the throne. Under a divine trance, he writes a sentence that would terrify the religious elite. A sentence that brings the ghost of Melchizedek screaming back into the light. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. Why would God swear an oath to bring back a priesthood that had been dead for a millennium? What did David see that forced this ancient ghost back onto the stage? Get ready, because the answer was hidden in a cave for 2,000 years. This was more than a royal decree. It was a legal assassination of the entire status quo. By invoking Melchizedek, David was declaring that the monopoly of the Levitical priests was coming to an end. He saw a future where the crown and the altar power and holiness would finally merge into one eternal figure. But for the religious elite in the temple, this was heresy. They didn't want a king they couldn't control. They didn't want a priest who didn't die. So, they buried David's vision under a mountain of rituals. They tried to turn Melchizedek into a myth, a ghost, a forgotten shadow. But they forgot one thing. You cannot kill a being who has no end of life. While the temple burned and empires fell, the truth was waiting in the silence of the desert, preserved in clay jars, waiting for the moment the stone would strike. 1947. A remote, wind-swept cave in the Judean wilderness. The sound of a single stone striking a clay jar didn't just break a piece of pottery. It shattered a 2,000-year-old seal on a secret that was never meant to be told to the masses. Most people think the Dead Sea Scrolls were just ancient copies of the Bible, pious relics of a bygone era. They are fundamentally wrong. What was found in Cave 11 was a theological nuclear device, a document labeled 11Q13, the Melchizedek Scroll. While the religious elite in Jerusalem had spent centuries scrubbing this mysterious man from the official records, the desert had been guarding his true, terrifying identity. This wasn't just old leather. It was a forbidden revelation of a king who outranks the stars and possesses the authority of an eternal judge. The text of 11Q13 is staggering, bordering on what many ancient scholars would call absolute heresy. It refers to Melchizedek not as a mortal king of a forgotten city, but as Elohim. In the fierce, uncompromising monotheism of the Hebrew world, that title is reserved exclusively for the Creator. Let that sink in. How can a man who shared a simple meal of bread and wine with Abraham in a dusty valley also be the divine judge of the universe? This is the core paradox of Qumran. To the Essenes, the radical, apocalyptic scribes who fled the spiritual corruption of the Jerusalem temple, Melchizedek was the Prince of Light. He wasn't just a priest. He was a celestial executioner, a divine archangel of the highest order who would descend at the end of the age to deliver the final, crushing blow to Belial, the prince of darkness, and his demonic legions of the night. The scroll depicts a scene of terrifying cosmic majesty. Melchizedek, standing in the center of the divine council, surrounded by the heavenly host. He is not there to offer a sacrifice, he is there to execute a sentence. He is the leader of the sons of heaven in their war against the sons of darkness. This was the secret the temple priests feared most, a power that operated far beyond their rituals, a priesthood that didn't need their permission to exist or to judge. Why was 11Q13 a death sentence for the religious establishment in Jerusalem? Because it exposed the temple for what it really was, a system of temporary fixes. The priests in Jerusalem built their multi-billion-dollar empire on the monopoly of guilt. They traded in the repetitive, never-ending blood of bulls and goats, sacrifices that had to be performed every single day because they never actually washed away the stain of the soul. Their entire social and economic power depended on you being a permanent prisoner of the law, forever needing a middleman to speak to God on your behalf. They were the ultimate gatekeepers of a broken system. But Melchizedek? The scrolls reveal he was the executive of the final Jubilee. In the ancient law, the Jubilee was a year of total debt cancellation. But the Essenes believed this was just a shadow of the real thing. They claimed that Melchizedek offered cosmic restoration. He was the one who would proclaim the ultimate liberty to the captives and cancel the spiritual debts of the human soul once and for all. He offered permanent atonement, By calling him Elohim, the Essenes were effectively declaring a spiritual coup d'etat. They were saying the human priests, with their DNA-based authority and their dying bodies, were just flickering, fading candles in the blinding presence of the sun. The religious elite had to suppress this order because you don't need a dying priest when you have an eternal, divine king. They buried the scroll, but they couldn't kill the reality of a priesthood that exists beyond the reach of death and the limitations of time. But just as we think we've solved the mystery of this celestial being, another ancient tradition throws a violent wrench into the machine, pulling us back down to the mud and blood of the earth. While the Qumran scrolls say he is a divine entity from the stars, the ancient Targums and the Talmud insist on something much more grounded, yet equally shocking. Melchizedek was Shem, the son of Noah. Think about the staggering implications of this identity. Shem was the primary survivor of the Great Flood. He was the only human bridge between the antediluvian world, the world that was destroyed, and the world that is. He carried the memories, the forbidden technologies, and the secrets of the era of the giants in his very bones. This creates a massive, mind-bending contradiction. How can one person be both a divine Elohim of the end times and a flesh and blood survivor of the Great Deluge? Was he a man who lived so long, hundreds of years, that he became a living legend? Or was he a celestial entity who stepped into the skin of Noah's son to guide the destiny of Abraham's lineage through the darkness of history? The answer lies in the receding, dark waters of the flood and the strange events on the ark. To find the truth, we have to look back at the only human in history who knew exactly what the world looked like before the rain started to fall. If Melchizedek is Shem, then the King of Righteousness isn't just a religious title, it is the survival of a forgotten, supernatural age. We are about to strip away the final layer of the mystery. We are going back to the very beginning of the world to find the man who refused to die and the priesthood that predates the creation of man. Get ready, because the forbidden genealogy of Noah is about to reveal a bloodline that isn't from this earth. We left the caves of Qumran facing a terrifying, mind-bending contradiction, a king who is called Elohim. But to find the historical pulse of this mystery, we must turn our gaze back to the only event in human memory that wiped the biological slate of the world clean, the Great Flood. Ancient forbidden records hint at a staggering possibility that the secret societies of the ancient world whispered for millennia. Melchizedek was not a new character appearing out of nowhere in Genesis 14. He was a survivor. Specifically, he was Shem, the eldest son of Noah. If this is true, the man who met Abraham in the Valley of Shaveh wasn't just a local ruler. He was a walking relic of a destroyed civilization. He was a man who had seen the sun rise on a world that no longer existed, a world where the Watchers walked among men and the original language of creation was still spoken in the gardens of the earth. He was the only human bridge between the antediluvian era of giants and the fragile, muddy beginnings of our modern history. Abraham wasn't just meeting a king, he was meeting his own direct ancestor, a man who possessed the living memories of a world before the rain. The Bible's most cryptic description of Melchizedek is that he is without father, without mother, without genealogy. Most theologians treat this as a spiritual metaphor. However, the secret archives of the Essenes and ancient midrashic texts treat it as a legal and biological reality. When the flood waters covered the earth, every library, every kingdom, every record, and every family tree of the first world was liquidated. Shem was a man whose genealogy belonged to a dimension that was now buried under miles of sediment. In the legal eyes of the post-flood world, he had no father or mother because they were citizens of a vanished era. But there is a deeper, more chilling layer, the genetic reset. The evidence suggests that post-flood humans suffered a rapid collapse in longevity, dropping from 900 years to barely 100. Shem, however, was a carrier of the original blueprint, the pre-flood DNA that possessed the power of an indestructible life. While lifespans were collapsing all around him, Shem stood as a biological miracle. To Abraham, who was seeing his own generations shrink, a man living 600 years appeared to be immortal. He was a living portal to a superior human biological era. The evidence found in the shadows of history suggests that the 1 year inside the ark was not just about surviving a storm. It was a cosmic transfer of power. As the waters rose, Noah, the last high priest of the antediluvian world, passed down the garments of Adam. These were not clothes made of wool, but the original spiritual authority lost in Eden, said to be infused with the light of the first creation. While the rest of humanity was busy fighting for survival in the mud of Mesopotamia, Shem traveled to the center of the earth, the coordinate later known as Salem. He established a sanctuary for the antediluvian wisdom, guarding the original protocols of how to communicate with the divine. When Abraham returned from slaughtering the 4 kings and the Rephaim, the mutated giant leftovers of the pre-flood world, Melchizedek appeared to confirm a victory. Abraham wasn't just fighting local kings, he was cleaning up the last remnants of a spiritual infection, the Nephilim bloodline. Melchizedek's bread and wine were the protocol of transfer. The last survivor of the old world was handing the keys of the planet to the father of the new world. This is where the mystery hits the hardest, the conflict between being and becoming. The system of Aaron and the Levites was a priesthood of becoming. It was mechanical, exhausting, and legalistic. You had to do rituals to become holy. You had to offer blood to become clean. You had to prove your DNA to become a priest. It was a priesthood of the flesh, limited by the graveyard. It was, as the ancient texts describe, a law of a carnal commandment. But Melchizedek represented a priesthood of being. He didn't need a pedigree or a temple because his life, his multi-century existence, was his authority. He was the sanctuary. The wicked priests of Jerusalem, as described in the Qumran scrolls, were desperate to hide the Shem-Melchizedek link. Why? Because if the people realized that the true priesthood was eternal and didn't depend on the temple in Jerusalem, the priests would lose their gold, their tithes, and their psychological control over the masses. They wanted a system of dying priests, because you can tax a dying man. You cannot control a king priest who remembers what the world looked like before the temple was even a thought. They tried to turn Shem into a ghost to save their own bureaucracy. Yet a final mystery remains. Why did the Essenes call him Elohim? The answer suggests that Melchizedek is not just a name, but a celestial office, a position in the divine council. Shem was the first human to be clothed in this office, becoming a living portal between heaven and earth. He lived so long that he became a legend, then a myth, and finally a ghost in the desert wind. He was the prototype of the King of Righteousness, holding the world together until the seed would arrive. He was the guardian of the original altar, waiting for the one who would finally shut down the animal sacrifice industry forever. The religious elite thought they had finally secured their monopoly through the law of Moses. They thought the repetitive blood of goats was the only way to speak to God. They had scrubbed the memory of the indestructible life from the minds of the people. But then came Jesus of Nazareth, a man from the tribe of Judah, the tribe of kings, with no legal DNA-based right to the altar of Aaron. How could he claim the priesthood? How could he walk into the Holy of Holies? Because he didn't follow the law of the temple. He followed a law that was written before the flood. He was the return of the ancient order. Get ready, because the illegal priest is about to dismantle the entire world. For 1500 years, the spiritual world was locked in a rigid monopoly built on DNA. If you were not a biological descendant of Aaron, you were an outsider. You could not touch the altar. You were legally barred from the divine presence. This was the Levitical priesthood, a system defined by its biological boundaries and its inherent failure. But then, a man from Nazareth committed the ultimate act of spiritual treason. He claimed to be a high priest, yet he didn't have a single drop of Aaron's blood. He was from the tribe of Judah, the line of kings, not priests. By every law of Moses, Jesus was an illegal priest. His existence was an assault on the establishment. But as the ancient records reveal, he wasn't breaking the law. He was evoking a better covenant built on a foundation that predated Sinai, the order of Melchizedek. The evidence from the Forbidden Scrolls reveals a profound war between two systems, becoming versus being. The Levitical priests were in a constant, exhausting state of becoming. They had to be purified daily. They had to offer sacrifices for their own sins first. Their priesthood was based on a law of a carnal commandment, a system of the flesh. It could never achieve perfection because its ministers were mortal. They died. Their priesthood was interrupted by the grave. Every time a high priest died, the entire system had to reset, leaving the people in a permanent state of spiritual debt. But the order of Melchizedek, as fulfilled in Jesus, operates on a celestial dimension. It is a priesthood of being. He did not become a priest through a ritual. He was recognized as a priest based on the power of an indestructible life. This is the ultimate system killer. If a priest cannot die, he never needs a successor. If his life is indestructible, his intercession never stops. The religious elite were terrified of this because you cannot control or tax an eternal priest. Jesus didn't need the temple's permission. He was the return of the ancient king-priest, the Elohim figure, stepping into human skin to dismantle a corrupt, dying bureaucracy. The ancient texts highlight a detail that the religious establishment tried to bury: the divine oath. The Levitical priests were appointed without an oath. They simply inherited the job through biology. But when God speaks of Melchizedek, he declares, "The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind." Why the oath? In ancient legal architecture, an oath from the Creator signifies an irrevocable cosmic shift. It signifies that the old system was merely a placeholder, a shadow of the reality to come. There is a staggering legal consequence here. When the priesthood changes, the law must change also. Jesus wasn't just adding to the law of Moses, he was superseding it. By establishing a priest from the tribe of Judah, God was legally terminating the monopoly of Levi. He was moved the altar from a building of stone to the heart of humanity. This was a legal takeover of the spiritual realm, replacing a weak and useless system with one that could actually bring perfection to the human soul. The temple in Jerusalem was a factory of death, flowing with the blood of millions of animals. Yet, as the forbidden records point out, that blood could never take away sins. It could only cover them temporarily. Jesus, as the high priest of the order of Melchizedek, did the unthinkable. He didn't offer the blood of another. He offered himself. He was the priest and the victim simultaneously. Because his life is forever, his one-time sacrifice became an eternal act of atonement. This is the permanent atonement the Essenes were searching for. The monopoly was broken. The DNA requirement was incinerated. Any person from any nation could now access the divine through a priest who would never die and a king who would never be overthrown. But if Jesus is the fulfillment, we are left with one final, haunting question. Melchizedek was described as having neither beginning of days nor end of life. He was a type of the Son of God. Does this mean Melchizedek was a pre-incarnate appearance of the Messiah himself? Or was he a man so transformed by the divine presence that he became a living portal between worlds? The answer lies in the very beginning, in the genealogy that was scrubbed from your records. We are going back to the forbidden archives to find the true source of this indestructible life. We began this journey with a shattered jar in a dark cave, and we end it at the collapse of a worldwide religious monopoly. For thousands of years, the shadow of Melchizedek lay hidden beneath layers of tradition, buried by a religious elite who feared a power they could not control. They wanted you to believe that access to the divine was a commodity requiring a building, a ritual, and a specific biological DNA. They enforced a system of becoming, where you are forever paying a debt you can never clear, forever sacrificing yet never reaching perfection. But the revelation of the order of Melchizedek alters the very fabric of reality. It tells us that the illegal priest did not merely bend the rules, he ended the old system entirely. The evidence from the forbidden records leads to a stunning conclusion. Jesus did not simply fulfill a prophecy, he became the guarantor of a better covenant. In the old system, the law functioned as a schoolmaster, a temporary guardian that could expose sin but lacked the power to remove it. A priest in the order of Melchizedek does not offer a temporary fix. Because he possesses the power of an indestructible life, he offers a permanent solution that bypasses the limitations of the flesh. The ancient oath, "The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever," signals that the bridge between heaven and earth now stands permanently open. There is no more need for the blood of bulls, no more dependence on a human middleman, and no more reliance on a law rooted in fleshly commandment. The veil was not only torn in a temple in Jerusalem, it was incinerated in the spiritual realm for all humanity. The priesthood of flesh, built on ancestry and interrupted by death, has been superseded by the priesthood of the Spirit, grounded in eternal, living authority. And so we return to the question that has haunted this investigation from the beginning. Who was the man in the valley? Was he Shem, survivor of the flood, carrying the ancient DNA of a vanished world? Or was he a celestial Elohim stepping into time to guard the promise until the appointed hour? The truth transcends any single identity. Melchizedek was the blueprint. He was the type and the shadow of the Son of God. He guarded a royalty not of this world, a living placeholder for the King of Kings. Whether transformed patriarch or divine apparition, his mission was singular: to testify that there exists a kingdom that predates the law and a priesthood that will outlast the stars. Today, the ruins of the temple in Jerusalem stand as a silent witness to the failure of the fleshly commandment. The genealogies of the Levites have been scattered to the fires of history, a reminder that any system constructed on DNA will eventually crumble. Yet the order of Melchizedek endures. It is an invitation, extended to every human soul, to step out of the endless cycle of becoming and into the reality of being. You are no longer defined by bloodline, by failure, or by ritual performance. You are represented by a king, priest enthroned eternally. A man who conquered death not through technicality or loophole, but through the sheer force of an indestructible life. The Forbidden Bible was never about a missing manuscript. It was about a hidden identity. Melchizedek vanished into the desert wind 4,000 years ago, yet he left behind a key that unlocks a freedom no religious institution can tax, regulate, or revoke. The ghost of Salem has returned, and this time he carries the keys of the kingdom. The silence is over. The order has returned.